The House Budget Committee advanced the budget resolution yesterday, which opens the door for Republicans to cut taxes. Budget Committee Chairman Diane Black says that it is time to break with tradition and get something done.
We want to have a culture here in Congress where reconciliation, which is the reason why it was there to begin with, is for deficit reduction. And that is important for us to make sure that our colleagues understand that this is just the beginning, and this is looking at programs to make sure the programs that are years old are effective and that dollars are being well spent and that we're using them for those that are the most vulnerable.
Joining me right now is the Director of the Office of Budget and Management, Mick Mulvaney. Mr. Mulvaney, always a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Maria, thanks as always for having me.
So characterize the budget right now and what went down yesterday. Are you expecting that this is going to become embroiled in Republican infighting when it actually gets to the full House?
Well, and any budget that comes to the floor is going to be the subject of tremendous debate and should be. It's a fairly significant thing for the Congress to do. I think one of the things you overlooked in your introduction was the fact that every single Republican on that budget committee voted for the budget last night in committee. I think that's a tremendous success, something quite honestly that I don't think Diane Black, the chairwoman, expected, and certainly not something that we expected after working with her on the budget. The White House supported the budget. Obviously, I like my budget a little bit better, but we did support what they were doing. Very impressed they were able to get 100% Republican support last night in committee. I think that's a good sign as we move forward, not only to get a budget, but to lay the foundation through the budget for tax reform. So big day yesterday, I think, in the House.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad you brought it up. So tell us where this goes now.
Goes to the floor. I would assume next week. I think during one of your spots there the last half hour, you saw Jim Jordan talking about wanting to see some of the details of the proposed tax reform before they vote for the budget. Certainly that issue will continue to be debated over the weekend, as it should. But I do think you'll see the House pass a budget off the floor next week, and then things will move over to the Senate.
Can you move toward tax reform or even tax cuts once that's behind? People want to understand where this goes in terms of the actual domestic agenda.
Sure, and this is why a budget is so important. Because of these arcane voting rules in the Senate, this is the easiest way to look at it. If the House and Senate pass a budget, one together, they pass the same budget, then we can pass tax reform in the Senate with only 50 votes. If they don't pass the same budget, if they don't agree on a budget, then we would need 60 votes to pass tax reform in the Senate. Obviously, a tax reform bill with 50 Republican votes would look very different than a tax reform bill that has 52 Republican votes and 8 Democrat votes. So that's why this is absolutely critical, why the White House was so interested in seeing the House pass a budget yesterday, why we're so pleased that they did.
In terms of tax reform, there are all of these sacred cows that we've been talking about. Do you expect a tax package to be revenue neutral?
We've taken the position at OMB that what's more important about the tax reform is the economic growth that it promotes, the economic growth that it brings. You and I have talked before about the importance of getting to sustained 3% growth. We started talking just last week about MAGAnomics, Make America Great Again economics. Yeah. And a fundamental pillar of that is tax reform that gets us to economic growth. OMB is willing to accept short-term increases in the deficit in order to get that sustained 3% growth. We think it is the absolute most critical thing that the House can pass when it comes to tax reform, the absolute most critical thing they can pass when it comes to long-term economic growth. So we'll be continuing to push that agenda. So
there are reports this morning that the White House is actually scaling back on goals for corporate tax reform, reportedly looking now at a rate of 20% instead of the president's goal of 15%. Would that be the offset in terms of when you're looking at revenue neutral? You can't have revenue, you can't have no revenue and a 15% corporate tax rate. What are we talking about in terms of the corporate rate, really, sir?
Look, I talked to Secretary Mnuchin and NEC Director Cohn yesterday on this exact topic, okay? And our position is still 15%. We think that's where we need to be. Why, Maria? And I think your viewers would understand better than most that in order to get that 3% growth, in order to satisfy the requirements of MAGAnomics, we have to have tremendous productivity growth in this country. We're not going to get that without the capital investment. And tax reform is the key to that capital investment. Getting that corporate rate down as low as possible is what's going to drive that capital investment. So as far as I know, having talked to the two folks in charge of negotiating with the House and the Senate over the last several weeks, Secretaries Mnuchin, Director Cohn, 15% is still what we're pushing and 15% is what we want.
Yeah, but I mean, things have gotten so tough. I mean, even things that you can't control, right? I mean, we know what happened to Steve Scalise. He's still in the hospital after being being shot. Now we've got John McCain with brain cancer. I mean, this is just one horrible situation after the next, and the new Fox poll shows that 75% of registered voters are concerned about the country's economy. How are you going to get things done, given what the hand you've been dealt, sir?
It's a great opportunity for us to show the differences between the White House and Capitol Hill. If you look at what we've been able to do on our own in terms of Neil Gorsuch's nomination, in terms of the deregulatory agenda we put in place. I wish we could talk about the 860 deregulatory actions we've taken in the first 6 months. The things that we've been able to do by ourselves, we've been tremendously successful with, and I think you've seen that optimism filter through to the markets and to the broader nation. But when it comes to Congress getting stuff done is where things seem to come screaming to a halt. So in your intro, we talked about the president asking them to stay and work during August if they don't have health care. This building behind me works every single day and just about every single weekend. So I know that OMB does. We need Congress to do the same until they start to have the same type of success that the administration has had.
So you still think that there's going to be a health care bill come to a vote to the president's desk, followed by tax reform?
I do, and I think what you're seeing in the Senate is exactly what you and I talked about 2 months ago in the House. When the House bill failed in mid-March, everybody said the Obamacare repeal was dead, yet let them alone for 3 or 4 weeks, and the House was able to come to some type of conclusion. They passed a bill. By the way, in the House, the opposition was not right-wing or left-wing. It was a strange combination of folks on both sides of the political spectrum within our party who objected to that first health care bill. Those parallels are uncanny with what you're seeing right now in the Senate, and I do honestly think that before this is over, you'll see the Senate pass a health care bill as well, and something will end up on the president's desk.
All right. We will leave it there, and we'll be watching the developments. Mick Mulvaney, good to see you, sir.
Thanks, Maria.
OMB Director Mick Mulvaney there.